Hello and welcome in. I'm Wendy Campbell. I want to thank you for taking a moment to check out this podcast. Now, you're probably wondering what this podcast is all about. So let me see if I can break this down for you. Essentially, this podcast is all about health and wellness and travel and adventure and friendships and all the things that really kind of get you. I was looking around. I've been really searching for these conversations that I just have not been finding. Now, there's a lot of great podcasts out there, so I don't want you thinking that that's what I'm saying. I just felt like there was something different, something that was missing. So we decided to create the podcast. Now, that being said, I hope you enjoy it and I hope you find what I hope to find out of it, which is just a deeper connection and a little bit more community. So in this first podcast, we connect with Jessica Patterson. She is the director and owner of Root Center for Yoga and Sacred Studies in Colorado Springs, Colorado. You can find her online if you want to check her out right now while we're talking at rootdownandgrow.com. I've been lucky enough to know her for many, many moons now. In fact, we met years ago while we were in boarding school in Colorado Springs. So let me tell you, she is so much more than a yoga teacher. She's totally a guru. She's a spiritual guide. She's a yoga therapist. She's a travel adventure buddy. She's all the good things. And I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. So while we talk, it's a lot about yoga. It's a lot about spirituality, but it's so much more about the connection. Programming note, while we were having our conversation, the video portion of the conversation only recorded her. However, if you're listening on audio, this will affect you not at all. So either way you enjoy it, it's worth it. It's totally worth the deep dive. So traveling straight into the heart of it, please enjoy Jessica Patterson. Hello. Hi. How are you? Thank you for agreeing to do this.
Yes, I was like, wait, what are we talking about? So I'm excited. I'm like, oh, I get to hang out with Wendy and we'll just talk like whatever.
It doesn't seem like once you hit 40, there's a place for you to go talk about all of the things. So wellness and health and family and money and all the things that make us whole, regardless of what we're doing. We've already done a lot of things. So it seems kind of needless to turn around and be like, okay, well, I'm going to give you a life hack. Well, I don't need a life hack per se, but what I do want is to build a community. But anyway, so when we first started talking about it, I was trying to think of, okay, well, who would I want to talk to? Who would I want to bring into this circle? And you were honestly one of the first people I thought of, because I think you started Root about the same time I got pregnant with my son. And I was like, oh, I'll go as soon as like I've had him and whatever. And then we moved and never made it in, but I've always loved, like, I love the community that you've built. And I love the people that I didn't know you knew, that know you now, that they seem completely different and changed. And I love all of that. So what I wanted to do is kind of talk with you and really kind of start with, you and I have a long history. And it's been a wonderful history, but we don't connect as much as we socialize on social network. And so kind of bringing that into that space of like a tangible conversation and kind of, I guess we don't have to start all the way back in high school because that's a million years ago. We could. But you and I started there and then kind of separated over time and kind of reconnected as you were starting Root. But yeah, so I wanted to start at the very beginning, kind of where you've always been poetic in nature and beautiful in nature. And so I'm not surprised that when you started Root, I wasn't surprised at all. It just seemed like a natural place. But can you kind of bring me up to that point between in the gap, and we'll start there and then kind of go through all of the things. And I'd love your input on all things. So I don't want it to be like a Q&A kind of thing, but more of a, let's talk about these things that you seem to have a natural intuitive connection to.
Well, thanks. Oh, so happy to see you. Well, I started practicing right out of high school. So right after I graduated, I went to Cornell University, and while I was there, I took a class, and then I ended up leaving Cornell for various reasons and took a year off. And so I dabbled in a yoga practice. And fast forward, I went to graduate school in 2002. And right out of graduate school, and actually during graduate school, my practice became even more powerful for me because I was doing a lot of research of some pretty violent stuff. And
Yeah. What were you
so
into?
I was in the English department, but I was in the like cultural criticism and literary criticism. So lots of intersections with philosophy and what was then women's studies, now more gender studies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so my work was actually around the naturalization of violence against non-human animals, and specifically factory farmed animals, the ones who are the least visible and the least, like we're not likely to see them as individuals. We see them as products. We see them. So I was looking at that through the lens of how language allows that kind of violence, the historical ways in which we've created those hierarchies, how those hierarchies operated to, at any given time in history, also say, well, you're not human or you're subhuman, and what that means, right? When you create a hierarchy like that, which is relevant to the work I do now, which is why I'm addressing it. But so I was in graduate school, finished graduate school, took a job at University of Colorado, Colorado Springs in the English department, was teaching there.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad died, and he died very suddenly, right? Like we were emailing about a time to talk. I was in my office doing office hours, and I left the building that evening, and I went home, and within a couple of hours I got a phone call that he'd had a heart attack and died.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So he was 56 years old, and it was one of those, right, irretrievably destabilizing times. And I was married at the time, and working in the English department and so forth. And I guess the best way, just in terms of not belaboring the story, is because I also now do a lot of work around grief
Mm-hmm.
and loss. But, it was one of those things where you're thrown up in the air by the proverbial rug being pulled out from underneath you. And in that time, you have an opportunity in a way to reassess how you're going to land. And I didn't want to land where I had been. And so it was not only a destabilizing for me as a person, it became something that shifted my entire life. But in that period, my heretofore sort of dabbling practice in yoga became essential. And it's just, I started working with it every single day because it was the only time that I felt anchored in my body, and
Mm-hmm.
I felt clear about anything when nothing else felt clear. And so from that, then by the end of that year at UCCS, I didn't feel like going back and teaching. And so I sat with it. Again, these are things that now I do all the time. I'll sit with something and just let my feel into if it's a yes or a no.
Mm-hmm.
Super clear. The ego gets very garrulous about it. It wants to explain all the reasons and all the detail, but it's like, yes, no, stop, go. Right. And for me, it was a no. And I didn't know exactly what that meant. But at the same time, because of the work I'd done in graduate school, I was hooked up with various animal advocacy organizations who needed help with communication and how to make a message more effective and how to make it more clear, and everything from copy editing to really helping someone shift the message that they're giving. And so I had started studying nutrition, just like it seemed like this natural thing, because many people, when they encounter the violence against agricultural animals, and they decide, okay, I'd like to eat, more plant-based. What do? I was like, here, I'll learn about that. And so I did 2 different schools of nutrition,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time had begun formal yoga training. And none of this with the intention of becoming something, just like little steps along the way. And after I'd done my first formal yoga teacher training, my teacher at the time asked me to cover a class, and I, had no interest. And to this day, I would say, I know I'll get to root, but to this
Oh no,
day,
you're doing great. This is exactly the way it should go.
okay.
Yeah.
I I've always had a reluctance, right? So I think there are lots of people who go into the sort of work that I do and they have an agenda. They're like, I want to be a this or that. And that was not me. And so I never, for example, I wasn't interested in creating a teacher training program. I taught for many programs, taught for program Durango, taught for several programs in Colorado, North Carolina. And at some point along the way in my classes, I had enough students who were saying, "Hey, could I do a training with you?" And I'm like, "Well, I teach here, here, here." And they said, "No, I want to do something with you." So I created something, and this has become a sort of tenet, I guess, for me, is when it's a relevant, it's a meaningful response to something. The work is very different. So it was a response to a request, to a sincere request, that I created a teacher training program. And I continued to teach all over. And eventually, after, I guess, 10 years of teaching and running running a program for, I think at that point it had been maybe four or 5 years. I don't even remember now. I was no longer interested in being subject to someone else's space and their ideas about what yoga was or what we're there to do. And I also had, and I can go into this a little or a lot, but I had a really, leading up to Root, I had started a PhD program in California. And I had decided that I didn't need a PhD, that I would, read all the books anyway. And I was on this sort of cusp of, what am I going to do with the work that I've been doing? And do I want to keep just like teaching out of other people's spaces and being subject to their visions and so forth? And I went through a really bad situation, which I can touch on if it's useful. But suffice to say, I had not just a breakup, but like a doozy of a breakup.
Mm-hmm.
And that also entailed a health crisis. And so I was at this point where I was like, I think I'm just going to walk away from it all and go do something else. And something in me again said, like, stay. And I ended up opening Root instead. So while I had this sort of instinct to run and get away from everything and just unplug from the whole identity, I instead rooted in even deeper and created a space really in response, not just to the work that I'd been doing, but I needed a sanctuary. I needed a space that felt like a space where important work was happening, not just the gymnastic fitness idea of yoga, but the real work of it. And so Root itself was birthed out of, number one, a really very challenging situation for me personally. And at the same time, it was a response to a community that at that point was outgrowing the containers that could hold us,
Mm-hmm.
and hold us in a way that felt in alignment with what I most valued, which is not the superficial, is not the exercise based,
Mm-hmm.
like I'll be the first to tell people a lot of yogic teachings were originally designed to help an individual cross over from one life into the next. And so it's uniquely equipped to help us in these major transformations in our lives, including the death of all those we love, which is guaranteed.
Which is beautiful in so many different ways. And I want to dive deep into that. But before we go much further, I also just want to champion you for a moment. And there's so much in today's world that almost forces and requests you to not follow your intuition. It's very much noise, 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 noise. Look this way. I've got the best idea, follow my idea. There's a lot of blinking lights. And so I think, to your point, a lot of what I'm feeling, and I think a lot of people are feeling, is that almost cry for the intuition call. So in order to bring it back, it's almost like you have to pull out, and you do this very well. I see you step away from all things electronic all the time. And every time you do it, I'm like, oh, I want to do that too. But I'm also the media director. So, but so to that though, I think on a larger scale, the recognition and almost the calling to women who are so centered, bring back the center and start listening and taking the moment and the pause. Did you know intuitively to pull away when you first started pulling away, or did you just automatically do it? Was it something that, people were telling you to do, or did you just feel it?
You mean in general as part of the sort of general self-care of Jessica?
Yeah, just kind
Yeah.
of the Jessica path. Yes.
Yeah. I think that, did you know I missed 30 days of school my senior year of high school? So I think I've always had a kind of nature that, as I don't like reducing it to introvert and extrovert. Although I will tell you that anytime I've taken any of those assessments, I fall very hard introvert.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think, I've always had an instinct toward contracting, and I really enjoy solitude and quiet. And I think that when I have that, what I know is that my whole nervous system, everything settles. And then I feel regenerated and rejuvenated and able to create. But I have to create from a kind of a place of stillness, not a space of feeling revved. So I think part of it I come by just naturally, a rhythm like that I
Mm-hmm.
can't sustain too much outward energy. I have to draw in to do it. But I think life really taught me that too, that I was forced into it at times where you're just sort of brought to your knees. I say this to my students all the time. You're brought to your knees, and you either decide, are you brought to your knees in surrender, or are you brought to your knees in reverence? And I think I'm brought to my knees a lot in a reverent way. But coming back to what you're saying, the center, so much of what we're conditioned to how to experience ourselves and how to express ourselves, particularly as women, is from the outside in, as objects of others' gaze, or as objects of others' validation, or objects of others' desire, or approval, or fanship, fandom, whatever it is. And when you're an object, you're not necessarily making decisions as a subject. You're always making your decisions. You're basing everything from the periphery in,
Mm-hmm.
if it ever penetrates the center. And life, I think, just has a way, of course, of jostling us into our center because the periphery becomes so unstable. There's only so much you can do on the surface before the foundation of who you are has to be able to sustain that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big part of it for me. I like necessity as the mother of invention. I mean, it's necessity that's pushed a lot of things for me. It's not always just meaning, I think the deeper intuition, because I think there's a level that we confuse
Right.
intuition with our conditioning and our habits. And the assumption that the intuition is always going to guide us towards something that feels like ease. And in fact, often our intuition, like the real compass setting is toward living your life. If we were to put it this way, there will never be another you. Like it's never going to happen again.
Mm-hmm.
And so why waste one's life force and life energy trying to follow just other groomed paths? And so life wants to live itself through us. And that means at times that we're going to be directed, if we really get clear about the intuition, we're going to be directed into the stuff that just scares the crap out of us. Or where our cultural training has taught us to be like, I don't have the money, or I don't have the this, or, all the stories of not being enough. And so, sometimes I think what we call intuition or instinct is just the next layer of our cultural training. But
Mhm.
when you're really tapped into it and you really let it guide you, it's guiding you into the thickets, because it's about you making the life that is authentic.
Right. Right. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of people. I think one, because it's terrifying, but two, because listening and truly being authentic to yourself sometimes you just don't always, you want to believe that you understand it. But you get into a position where the challenge seems overwhelming, and then you've got all of the input. So the noise, and again, it comes back to everyone's opinion of what you are. And I think what's interesting about that is being able to stop it and really go forth with that path that does kind of break your brain a little bit
Yeah.
and take you to the new place, because I think that's where the good stuff is. That's where the next level energy is. So yeah.
Exactly. And when you put it in terms of energy, you think of it often like how energy outgrows a form,
Hmm.
whether it's a marriage or it's a job or it's something that we've been doing in our own lives. There's a certain amount, like say, whatever somebody calls it, called
Hmm.
prana in the world that I work in. Someone else might call it their soul, or, their true self. But by
Right.
whatever name we call it, when the energy essentially it needs, so you either keep insisting on the old form at the expense of the energy, at the expense of the life force, at the expense of the creative force, at the expense of that, or you let that transform you, which is by definition a relinquishing of the old form and a period of that liminal period where you're neither what you've been nor have you become the next version. And that's the terrifying part, because you are in the in between.
Hmm.
And you say in formal, like physical practices of yoga, you're most likely to get injured in a transition, but it's true in life. It's in transitions we tend to speed up because we want the next known thing.
Hmm.
And we make really erratic decisions. We grasp at something that seems to give us short-term security or stability, again, at the expense of where you're really being, like, if you'd really let your life lead you towards something, you may have to let go of security and stability for a while, but be able to find solid ground in meaning,
Right.
purpose.
Right. Exactly. And I think it's important that the conversation comes back to that often, because there is so much misinformation about how you should find your way.
Mhm.
And it starts so young. We start when we're children, and we're molded into these little mimics of our parents. And then as we go off into, the teen years and start exploring and learning who we are, then we're taking it from our peers. And then we get into relationships and we take it from our partner. And then, you get to a point, and I think that's kind of analogous to where we are now, where I'm at a point, and I'm sure you're at a point too, because this is kind of who you are, but at a point where going back and taking the opinions of everyone isn't as entertaining anymore. Like, I want to know who I am based on what I think, and I want my people around me to share that energy, because I think that's where the really good magic is. That's where you really get to the heart of friendship and relationship. And so early we learned, at least I learned, that that true identity is so much more important, more valuable. No matter what form it's in, even the broken form is more honest, and that honesty is a much more intriguing place to be.
Sure. And that's the real heart of intimacy. I mean, I don't think any of us actually get to know ourselves in a vacuum. We're, part of an ecosystem.
Hmm.
But I think that when we lose track of, again, that we're subjects of our lives and not objects, backdrops to the lives or the visions of others. And then those relationships, as you said, like, to me, the real the intimacy of a relationship is the willingness to be in the hard stuff, the messy stuff, just cutting to what is real. And the more situated we are in that, the more comfortable we are with that. It's not a known thing. It's not like yourself and it's a done deal, but right in the process of the yearning to always be in that deeper connection with oneself, we tend to then cultivate deeper relationships with others that therefore become the nurturing forces that we need when we ourselves need to be held. And that's very different than the sort of codependent models that are given to us of, making one person your everything, making one situation your everything. It's a very precarious thing when you know that ultimately it's temporary. And there's something else that happens in this sense of a phrase I use a lot, like distribute the effort. So like in a community, I did a year-long program called the Untraining, and it was dedicated to yoga as embodied activism. And one of the things that we worked with in sort of a meta level was how we were working as a community, which meant, right, people coming to the forum and being very real about what's going on in their lives. And instead of just the like, oh, we're sorry you're going through that world, it was like the burden could get distributed throughout the community. So like you have 30 people seeking to help alleviate some of the unnecessary suffering in a situation so that that person can just feel held and go through the experience that they're having, as opposed to, the ways in which we'll often withhold ourselves from one another unless we feel perfect, and therefore we don't let one another in. And so it's a less, like if it were a weaving, it would be so loose a weaving, it would unravel with the slightest pull. But when you let one another into the mess, into the unanswerable questions, all of that, it's a tight weave. And there's resilience in that isn't just on the individual. Like for me to know myself, I must also be known.
Right.
But really
Which is
be
a
known.
juxtaposition that is just going to take a while for everyone to kind of come to, but I totally agree. And so I guess that brings me to your grief training that you do, which I thought I'd seen it a few times and thought what a beautiful thing to bring together and learn and to really share that experience. I think one of my girlfriends, I was going through a tough time and a bad breakup, and I was a mess. And I remember her looking at me and saying, Wendy, just feel your feels, feel them and let them happen. And no one, I think before that had ever actually given me permission to, not that I needed it, but I didn't know that I wasn't doing it. And so that awareness and that openness kind of let me go through my things, but also open the door for every other bad situation that happened. So I think what you're doing, I think is beautiful. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I'm very curious.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Oscar Wilde said, this is something I actually say in the workshop. I just happen to have the handout next to me, but Oscar Wilde said, where there is sorrow, there is holy ground. And I've always loved that. Where there is sorrow, there is holy ground. And so I created this program. I'm a yoga therapist, and there are lots of things where it's like yoga for something. And it starts to sound like, take two of these and call me in the
Right. Exactly.
And so one of my issues, I'm like, but what is yoga? Like, what is yoga? And I define yoga very differently. And so I created a program called the Yoga of Loss. It's the yoga of loss, not the yoga for loss. Because first of all, as part of the human condition is that we will lose, right? Like loss is inevitable. And it's the one condition we'll all go through. Not everyone will have cancer. Not everyone will struggle with addiction. Not everybody is going to experience chronic pain in their lives, but we will all lose loved ones and situations and aspects of ourselves. And so in yoga, there's first of all, the way I define yoga comes from a definition from one of my teacher's teachers, Sri Brahmananda Saraswati, who said that yoga is the state of missing nothing. And when I've sat with that over all these years, there's like, yoga is the state of missing nothing, which means when you're in the yogic state, you're not operating from the stories of deficiency or brokenness or fragmentation or not being enough or being too much, right? You're in the state that there's nothing that's missing. But it also reminds me, like to be in the state of missing nothing means you also don't miss it. You have the ability to be aware of a lot of things and not miss the little moments that add up to the big moments. Like, again, when I think about losing my father, and it's been 17 years now, what I miss are the ordinary moments. And yet
Right.
it's in the ordinary moments in our lives that we tend to tune out the most. But if you think about like, your son, or like our dogs, it's the ordinary moments that we miss the most. So don't miss it is a part of that teaching for me. But in that, then anything that we do that we say is yoga ought to be in the service of this state of missing nothing. So it ought not to compound any pre-existing ideas I have about how I'm not enough, or not good enough, or not this enough, or I'm too this or too that. Right? It shouldn't reinforce and concretize any ideas I have about being broken or deficient. And so loss is an inevitable experience. And so to say there's a yoga of loss is also to say that there's a sequence.
Mm-hmm.
There is an order to it. And it's not phases, and it's not a linear process at all, because life isn't. So I think of loss as a rite of passage. It's something that ushers you from who you thought you were into who you are. And every time we have another loss, it awakens all the losses we've experienced before. So I've come to think of loss as sacred land, holy ground, not a thing you go through, but a place we go to again and again and again until we, to a certain extent, make a home of it, like come to know it as a place
Right.
where we can be. And so I created the workshops and the trainings around it. Number one, we come together and we just are very open about everything from the physical experiences of grief and loss. If you look at all the symptoms, like if we're going to use the word symptoms, but right, like the experiences,
Right.
physical, psychological, physiological, emotional, relational, spiritual, even, those lists of symptoms dwarf just about any other condition you could come up with. It's so multifaceted. It's so profound. Loss is so profound. And in my experience, there's nothing like our own mortality or just the call to look at it that calls me more into life. Like when I remember how temporary, how fragile in a way life is, suddenly I'm no longer missing it, because this is it.
Mm-hmm.
So we have we explore a lot about the context of grief and loss. And one of the main things that we look at in the beginning of the program is how inept our culture, the dominant culture, I should say, is. And that we think, and this is an offshoot too, just spiritual work in general, that we think what we've done is we've taken this mythology of the rugged individual and we keep imposing it on everything. Like, spiritual work is not work just to be done as an individual, and certainly not the work of mourning and loss. And when you feel like it's like your thing to work through versus across cultures and at different times in different cultures, the way the community came together to support the griever,
Mm-hmm.
and the way it was clearly marked as something that someone was going through, as opposed to like, okay, you get 2 weeks off to grieve the sudden loss of your
Take your
spouse,
time, come back with a smile.
and
Yeah.
please come back. Yeah, come back the way you were.
Mm-hmm. Don't
Come back
change.
unchanged. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've been down in the underworld, like, you're eating pomegranates with the gods of the underworld, and you come back and they want you to be the same.
It's amazing to me that the world thinks that way, but yes. And what I think is interesting and how it kind of correlates to now, and this is kind of diverging a bit too, but with everything that we're going through globally and all of the loss of not just, I've lost people, but you've lost freedom and you've lost friends and you've lost that connection and that community. And there's also the concern, not even the concern, but just the threat of not getting back to a normal place where we can reconverge with that. I imagine that need and that desire is going to get bigger. And so how do you balance the global weight of loss of all of the things with a better energy, with a stronger energy, with a united energy? Because I'm struggling to see how we come out of this more unified. To me, it seems like we almost must segment in order to come out of it the way that it's structured to come out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, part of I'd say in a way that's maybe what bubbles underneath so much of the work I do, is a response to, let's see, how do I want to put it? There is no going back.
Right.
That's what. And I think that we have to create culture
Mhm.
that is capable of moving through transformation together. So I think part of the divisiveness within individuals, within families, and within like the bigger picture right now, as we see the political divisiveness and so forth, a lot of what I am able to hear underneath it is a deep attachment to something, not changing, which in yoga is known as dvesha, is like an aversion to something changing, or an attachment to something, right? Like holding on to something. And the problem with it is like life is always transforming. So when we come together, first of all, finding different ways of connecting is so important, because it's like I said to my students the other day, say I love you with me. And we all said, I love you. And then I said, now I want you to figure out 10 other ways to say that without using words. Like find multiple ways of saying the same thing. And so it strikes me that that's one of the keys, that we have to find new ways of connecting, new ways of expressing our connection.
Mhm.
But that ultimately we have, in order to move into this next, like we're in a collective initiation. And there are those who are trying to retreat back to the starting point, and it doesn't exist anymore. And there are those who are racing to get back to racing to get somewhere that doesn't exist yet, because it's all contingent on what we do now. And so I think there's great power even in the small villages, like the small communities, a community of friends, a community, right, like what you're doing, where you start to create a different ways of perceiving what it is we're going through. And it's really easy too, I think, to fall into that it's all bad. But just like any crisis, any tragic time is also incredibly illuminating. It reveals a lot. Now, of course, it's also going to reveal, I always liken it to if you have an unfinished basement or like a room where you store stuff, and you finally are like, I'm going to take a look, and you go in and you like turn on the light, you're going to see everything. You're not just going to see the stuff you like that you find so valuable, the thing that you're looking for. You're also going to see the stuff that you're like, why do I keep holding on to this?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we're in this space right now where the light is being cast, and it's almost a glare right now of all the fissures, of all the little violences, and of all the places that have long been there. They're just, right, it's amplified now. But so too, there's so much beauty, and there are so many opportunities to find relief. I think it's an incredible time for people to redefine what productivity is, what work is all about, what we expect from ourselves and one another, how we just sort of arbitrarily follow certain ideas about what it is, to work, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and how that could look different. So, I don't know if I'm
No, I
answering.
think you're right. It's a valuable insight to accept it and take it and grow from it and not hide from it. I think that's huge.
And part of the problem, as I see it, is that we're not equipped to digest and metabolize so much of what we take in. And because, like, if I were to use the metaphor of or the analogy of the digestive system, if the digestive system is compromised, no matter what you're putting in there, you're not going to make good use of it. And I think we have sort of, again, in yogic terms, we talk about this as it's like Agni, our fire, and it's low, it's weak. And it means that as everything's coming in, we're not digesting it, which means we're not integrating it. We're not metabolizing it. We're not able to release the waste of it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's sort of this collective, like carrying things around. It's like a collective energetic spiritual constipation all the time, psychological constipation. and it's like we need digestion, which if we're looking at the metaphor of the digestive system, it means you need to rest, because the only way to digest is when the system can come into some kind of rest.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
I thought that was funny because I said the pause
And I paused.
like,
Paused for effect.
yeah.
No, I think you're right. I think it's going to be a hard turn for a lot of people to do that. But there's magic in the rest, which brings me to fun and adventure, not to jump too quickly to the other side. But I love the idea of finding your tribe and traveling with your tribe. Most of the adventures I've been on, some of the best adventures I've been on, have been with friends and family, and just going to places I didn't expect to go. And you have that evolutionary moment in your time where something about you changes, whether it's because of the beauty of the place or the stress of the adventure or the fun of the adventure, whatever it is. So I know that you like to take your tribe on adventures, and I want to hear about them and why you choose those locations, what typically you see from those, and where you're going next.
Yeah, well, one thing I think happens when we travel, I taught in Taipei, Taiwan one summer, and it was the most, I spoke no Taiwanese, I spoke no Chinese. I had interpreters for most of the classes I was teaching. It was extraordinary. And one of the things that really hit me at that time that I think I'd known prior is when you travel, you get to leave behind, when I was talking about form, like suddenly, right, you find different aspects of yourself, because in a different context, in a different culture, where something else gets called forward. So that's one thing that I think is really therapeutic and can be super therapeutic when we're in a community of people we love or feel close to or feel safe with, that there's this sort of happens kind of collectively. We're not just reinforcing, we're not like sort of policing who we think the other person should be. Travel opens that up for us. I love that about seeing the world. I like to go, so lots, throw a rock and you're going to hit someone and they're going to be like, I'm a yoga teacher. So that's ubiquitous. And so for me, apart from, like, what does it really mean? And what is all of this that we're teaching? There's also, I'm not interested in doing what everyone else does. I never have been. And so I generally let myself be drawn to the things that I'm drawn to. One of those is, especially in the bigger conversations around the misappropriation and the commodification of westernized yoga, is, within those conversations is a call to oneself to also acknowledge and honor, sometimes reckon with, or get to know one's own heritage. And so I've always been drawn to different landscapes than most people would think of for retreats for that as well. And landscape is a big part of what I'm drawn to. So like I did a retreat in Northern Iceland, and we were in the very far north of Iceland in a very remote area. And it was just the land itself could have done all the instructing. I didn't need to do anything. It just does it. It does it for you. But I think it's incredible when we're able to be transplanted and allow our consciousness, therefore, to feel more open. That particular retreat was a rewriting embodied myths. So what I like to do is consider mythology from whatever traditions, and how different stories awaken different facets of us. And so it's true within ourselves, we carry around a lot of faulty mythologies. And when you're living according to a faulty mythology, life becomes very limited indeed. But when, let's say, like when you call forth a different aspect of yourself, and many of these traditions, the deities, they're mystical traditions, meaning those deities are really just extroverted aspects of the self. And so get to know these things. And as a way, of course, of getting to know a landscape or a culture. So I think that answering that's one thing that I'm really drawn to. I'm very much drawn to different kinds of landscapes. So we're doing that now. I leave in a couple of weeks. I'm leading a retreat in Mexico, and that's more standard, I think, to a lot of
Right.
people. But
I was definitely curious about Iceland, mostly because I have an insatiable lust to go see the Northern Lights and haven't.
and it happened every single day we were there.
Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. I just would stay there. I can't imagine like a better way to experience something. But that whole shift of your energy when you switch from one spot to another spot and it's so outside of your norm and everything that you kind of have to learn about yourself to survive and navigate that, I think is part of the brain break that makes it so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, you're relieved from your sense of self. I think there's no greater addiction that we have than to an idea of who we think we are. And when you travel, you're alleviated. There's a reprieve from that. Not always, right? I mean, I spent time in early on, at some point in undergraduate, I was down in the Atacama Desert of Peru, and it was harsh and it was hard, and it absolutely was scared little me, little 20-year-old me, because it was so demanding. And yet, all these years later, I can see how it allowed something else to arise. Like, you meet a part of yourself that if you're not given these different circumstances, you'll always think that, I guess what I'm saying, I think we confuse a lot what's been naturalized for what's inevitable. And when you're moved out of a situation, either through a tragic time, a crisis, right? You're moved out of the norm, or you choose, you're like, I'm willingly going somewhere totally different from where I am. It frees up a lot of energy and allows us to conceive of and then actually experience ourselves in a much different way than maybe what we've been living according to. And you take that with you, you don't forget that. Yeah. But I will say Northern Iceland, where we were, was spectacular. I am planning on doing that again.
I might have to do that one.
Yeah, that one. And it was great. It was writing. So
Mm-hmm.
it's yoga as a way of rewriting
Mm-hmm.
narrative. And then it was writing as a yogic practice of self-awareness and understanding. I have a retreat in Tuscany this August.
I might also have to do that one.
That one, I would love to have you come on that.
That would be fantastic.
It's like basically like an old villa that.
How do you find the places that you go? How do you decide this is the spot where everything changes?
Well, some of it's just me wanting to go places and then sussing out what might be available.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of Iceland and Italy, I have the help of a company who handles all the logistics, which is the best part, because that's not my forte. I don't want to deal with accommodations and meals and all of that. And so that's been wonderful too, because what they do, when they first reach out to me, they're like, we have these locations, and then you put together what you want to do. And all I have to really focus on is going and teaching. Right. And this one will be the one in Tuscany will be, it's really about like five sacred altars within us. So much in yogic philosophy, so many yogic teachings, things are organized by 5. Including a lot of people talk about the chakra system. There's lots of chakra systems, but the main 5 chakras are associated with 5 elements. Mm-hmm. And so it's like a way of exploring these qualities. So, like how we explore the solidity and the stability of the earth of us, what that means, right? If I have stability and solidity versus like what fire does within us, as fire is transformation. You have to have fire to have transformation. And anytime we put something in the fire, it breaks apart the old molecular forms of that which was before and frees up the energy to become something else. So just really cool stuff that we'll do for 5 days in Tuscany, in our own, in our own place, and very COVID savvy protocols, mm-hmm. so that people can go. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and so on my list, is the Highlands of Scotland.
Also need to sign up for that one.
Yeah,
I
that
mean,
one.
it's too beautiful up there. That has to be done.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
like walking and going back to Ireland. I spent time in Ireland. I haven't done a retreat there, but I'm working with one of the, um, a dear friend, student, and fellow teacher who we're working on something in Ireland together. So
That's
I'm drawn to these
amazing.
places. You'll find lots of people who are going to Costa Rica, and I am going to Mexico. It's
Which
for,
I think there's value. Like there's value in I want to go sit on a beach and also
yeah.
do a little yoga and drink some fruity drinks and whatever. But I think, the times that I've gone on journeys that I wasn't expecting, for example, so I went on a trip to um with my master's program to Latvia, and then we went to Israel. And a girlfriend and I decided to go to Jordan together, and went and found ourselves in the middle of the Wadi Rum Desert with a Bedouin camp and everything that you would imagine it to be. And something within that just it breaks your brain to a degree where you learn about yourself, but you also get a whole different perspective on everything around you and people around you. And I think when you meet those people in foreign countries and connect with them, you realize the commonalities, and you realize, the centristic nature of humans, and let us all come together. And I get really turned on by all that stuff. I love it. I think it's
Oh,
fantastic.
yeah. And you're speaking to something that I think is so, so powerful too, which is like what I was saying earlier. You could find a thousand ways to say I love you. Right. When you travel into different cultures, you discover that you don't have to always speak the language. There is a shared language. There is something that if we travel with humility and we travel with curiosity, will be awakened in you. It's when people travel arrogantly or with a lot of expectation that they're basically wanting a place to accommodate their old ideas about themselves, then it's a different journey. But I think when you go, it's like you say it breaks your brain. It's like, to me, it like breaks something open.
Hmm.
It's like that fire. You throw yourself into the fire of life, and it like, yeah, it breaks something open, but now something is freed up, and you can't put that away, right? Like it continues with you, and it frames how you begin to interact with all kinds of so-called foreign things in our lives, the things that we're less familiar with, you know.
Hmm.
But yeah, experiences like that.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. Have you thought about writing a book?
Yeah, so I started writing a book a long time ago, and actually have had this wonderful sort of cheerleading publisher, meaning he has stood by me and encouraged me. I even went and stayed with him in Brooklyn and his wife, and like to work on it. And I just never got it done. So it's part of the goal right now that I
Hmm.
start to take more time to do my writing. I feel like my days of public teaching, all like talking all the time, that's one of the days I get quiet, and then I like to write. So that
Hmm.
is a goal.
Oh, good. We'll make you talk more so that we can get some more out of you on a literal sense. I
Well,
would love that. I think that you have so much to share. It's such a beautiful. I feel like I've been watching you forever. You were like this little Athenian little spirit running around, and just so much energy, when we were younger, and you haven't lost that. And I think there's beauty in the adventure that you go and seek out for yourself, but also the adventure that you bring to people. And, it brings it back to the whole tribe mentality of building your own tribe and then sending them out in the world to create a larger tribe. And I see that happening. I've seen so many friends, like I said, who have gone through, who have met you, who I never in a million years would have thought our worlds would intersect so much. But then I see them on the other side, and the beautiful changes in them are just amazing. And so, congratulations to you, because that is beautiful. That is a gift that you give to everyone, and I think it's worth championing.
thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm really touched by that. I do think that at the end of the day, the work that I do is connect people to one another.
Hmm.
Like I think that's the gist of it. And I think when people feel connected, they're more likely to be courageous. They're more likely to take the risks, to do the things that they really want to do, because they feel supported. They feel like there's something connecting them, and
Hmm.
um, nurturing them in that. And And that's important to me, actually, also because there are a lot of people who get into the field that I'm in, or into the discipline that I'm in and make of it the industry where it becomes about them, like seeking fame or seeking followers or seeking, right? And it's really just driven from a place of like insecurity. And I'm glad that I have some like enough curmudgeon in me and like enough reclusive hermit in me that I'm like, I don't want that. What I want is for people to step into their lives really fully, like not be franchises of my work,
Mhm.
but to be the innovators of their work. And when I see that, like to reflect back to you, when I see the people who I've gotten to work with go off and go do stuff in the world, living this stuff in the world is so, that's when I feel like I'm doing meaningful work. It's not, people who just want to, and there's nothing wrong with the idea of wanting to teach yoga asana in a studio or whatever, but it's so limited. I'm like, we need yogis in politics and raising children and like, in the medical field. And what a difference, like I'm thinking about one of my students right now who's a nurse and has been on the front line of COVID, like was out in New York for 13 weeks in the beginning.
Oh my gosh.
She's like, this is why I became a nurse, and they needed nurses to help out there. So she went, and she's still, right now she's back in college. She's still doing this. I watch that and I think to myself how when another student of mine suddenly got very sick this year and ended up in the hospital with sepsis, they didn't know each other, but they've both been through the same program. So the nurse is there with her. And it was just like this feeling of what it would be like to have her caring for you, knowing who this person is. And then also that there's this, they have a connection even if they've never met.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is beautiful. And I can just step back because it's really just, loving people enough, caring about people enough, being genuinely interested in people enough that you can support someone in stepping into who they're here to be. And then they've got it. And like to be obsolete is the goal. And so I love that. And I love that, like that's one of the things. Yeah.
I think it's the lost art of community. And I think a lot, obviously, but I'm not right about a lot of things. But I think that, as we've kind of gone into our suburban worlds and the expansiveness of we can go be everywhere and do everything, we've lost our knit. And so going back to your metaphor of the stitching, when you don't have those crosses, how do you rebuild those in a world where you live in a town of 100,000 people or 200,000 people or 1,000,000 people, and I like all of this in such a way that I think part of even this project is just to start building that knit a little bit stronger for people who are feeling kind of not attached to anything, not a part of anything. And how do you kind of give your light and your warmth to somebody who doesn't know where to go for it and doesn't have the resources for it? And I think there's beauty in all of it, but all of it is really selfishly me trying to make the world kind of a nicer place for my kids and for my friends and for everybody. So I love it. I think it's beautiful.
I love that too. I was actually interviewed in a different podcast a while back by one of my friends, and she's the director of the yoga therapy school for which I work, and I'm a graduate and so forth. And anyway, we're talking about the beauty in loss and like hope. And we were speaking more to the losses that people are experiencing at this time, what you were talking about earlier, in terms of, sensing sort of the ways in which daily life is disrupted and people feel adrift and disconnected and so forth, which, just as an aside, like that's the root of suffering in the traditions that I study, right? Is the belief that you're alone. And anything in life that exacerbates that feeling of exile or isolation, it's extremely painful. But anyway, when we spoke, one of the questions was, like, how do you have hope when the world, I think about a Wendell Berry poem all the time. It's like, it's hard to have hope. And I sat with that. There was a period not too long ago, like nothing could be too long ago, right? Somewhere in the last 2 years, there was a period of just sitting like, it is really hard to feel hopeful right now. And what occurred to me really comes from the yogic traditions as a teaching, which is that you must let go of the fruits of your actions, right? You can't be attached to why you're doing something. And what occurred to me in that is that we have to do these things, even if in our lifetime we don't see it, but because there is the next generation that we owe it. And this idea, of the First Nations tribes who articulated in this in various ways. And of course, maybe the most famous is sort of paying it for the 7 generations, right? Mm-hmm. You do something with the 7 generations ahead of you in mind when you speak about your son. And I think how, like, I need to take action in this life, even when it's hard for me, like divesting from my own white privilege or whatever it is, even when it's hard for me. And I may not see the benefits of that, but that doesn't mean that there won't be a benefit to that. Mm-hmm. It becomes less selfish in the sense that it's like, you don't do it for you. You do it for all that makes you, like for me, I do so much from a place of love for the land, or love for the wildlife. When you think about, like, you do it for the things that bring love alive in you, not just for your own self-preservation, which is the spoiler alert, like, it won't work.
You're gonna lose, sorry.
Yeah, you'll lose. I mean, like, you can keep trying, you can Botox everything, you can do whatever, but at some point you're going to have to relinquish that. So what's it all for? And I'm reminded too, there's the thing in Australia, and I should know her name. I've mentioned this so many times, I'm embarrassed I don't remember her name, but she was like a hospice nurse. She is a hospice nurse. She started noticing that at the end of life, how many times people were recounting the things that their sort of regrets, mm-hmm. and how they're pretty much like all the same, that there's a pattern to it. I thought, well, like, if ever we're going to pay attention to those who are sort of truly those who come before us, the elders, what are they telling us? What matters in the end? If it's really consistent at end of life, what people are saying, what actually matters, that maybe we should just start living that way and not wait until them to,
yeah. I know, right? Like, maybe take a note and get it started now, because
take seriously that people are saying that they didn't wish that they, made more money. They wish things like that they'd paid more attention, mm-hmm. to the sound of someone's voice, or,
or the moments. It's all in the moments.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree totally. So when COVID went down, you started broadcasting some of your lessons, and I noticed you were opening things up. How's that working out? Do you find that that's actually getting attraction more out of state, or is that local people who are just coming in? And are you open to out of state and expanding that group?
So I had already been teaching some things live stream like this, like Zoom. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times I was doing that. Say I have a mentoring group, so there'd be people who were with me, and then there'd be people out of state or just who couldn't be there in person. We'd live stream. So when the pandemic hit and I had to make that initial pivot where everything had to go online, I was lucky that I already had some experience with that. But public classes were not part of, I had not been doing that. Mm-hmm. And then instructing other teachers how to do that. So we continue to do that to this day. So when I teach in person, like when I teach tomorrow morning in person, there will be some people in the space with us. We have severely limited the numbers. We used to have classes of like 35 people in there. Now, I think right now we've actually dropped where it's either a max of 7 or 10. It just depends on the week and how things are going. And then I might have, 10 people online. So I'm live streaming while teaching to people in the space. It's exhausting.
I was going to say, does that change your energy? Because you're projecting so much. It's one thing to project here, but to project out there is a whole lot of energy.
Yeah. And I'm actually paying attention. So I'm doing things like this, watching and then watching. And that's just really tiring. The beauty, of course, of it is I have seen students in class who I hadn't seen for 10 years.
Mhm.
I've had, well, so that's been really beautiful. The year-long program that we just wrapped up in October, there were people all over the country. There was actually someone out of the country too in that. So I love, in many ways, I love that the live stream and the things that I record, like Yoga of Loss will be a class that someone can access way after the fact, right?
Mhm.
Just watch it on their own. I love that that's all available, and it allows its expansion and allows people to be a part of things who may not otherwise, if we were just a brick and mortar. And I
Mhm.
will say, it's been hard, and I weigh every day whether or not to keep the brick and mortar, because ultimately what Root is a community.
Mhm.
That's what created it. So the space itself, it's beautiful, and a beautiful space could be created lots of places. And so we'll just see the pressures right now. The flip side of, we're online, but so too is everything else.
Mhm.
And so it's, been a drastic difference of what's being financially supported.
Right. Right. And it's hard. It's hard because it's so segmented now. And to your point, you can find all kinds of things online,
Yeah,
but the community part, I think, is the part that's missing.
this
And
is
it's
it,
so
Wendy.
key to the development of all the things.
Yep. One thing I know that we have, and why I'm not too terribly, I try to hold very loosely the physical space,
Hmm.
is that we have this connection. So something I say all the time to teachers, like the teachers in training, the therapists in training, and just regular everyday students is, yes, you could pay, $15 and have unlimited access to all these celebrity pre-recorded classes, but they don't know you, and they're not paying attention to you, and they don't know that your sister just died. They don't know that you tore your hamstring last week. They
Hmm.
don't know that you've been struggling with insomnia. Like, I know these things. And so when I'm teaching, even when I'm teaching a group, I'm paying attention to all the individuals I know. And when someone's new, I get to know them. And so with it's community, as you said, I mean, it's the heart of it. And you can't fake that.
But
Like
it's also, I think, yes, all of those things. It's also that charge you get from somebody understanding you, and I think that shared energy back and forth. And I talk about energy a lot, just because I think energy is so much a part of who we are and what we're doing and this experience that we call life. But I think when you connect with someone and you have that relationship, that energy, it grows and it's stronger, and then you feel more fulfilled and they feel more fulfilled, and then it's a Disney movie. Everybody likes it and everybody gets together and hugs and everybody has this happy energy. But I think that's what's missing.
yeah,
It feels
because
like that's what's missing.
it ripples out. This is the thing. What I've witnessed all these years, whether it's in trainings, classes, any of the things, is where people feel like there is a space where they are seen. And they are not just seen like as objects, they're seen and they're held regardless of the experience they're going through. No matter how messy or how delightful, they're held, they're welcomed. It's not like so many other circumstances in our lives where it's like, you curate yourself to a certain extent to fit into the situation. This is like the situation holds you. And then it ripples, right? So, like, one thing I'll say a lot in just regular classes is, surely there's someone who could benefit from your nervous system being a little more balanced today. So then suddenly, people are thinking about their children, their
Hmm.
spouses, like whatever, the cause for which, that they're so passionate. And realizing, like, as I take care of this becomes not only more effective in the world and more resilient in the world and more, but more powerful in the world.
Hmm.
That's a really big deal to not, if I just do it for my own well-being, that's great. My well-being is deserving. But when I think about what I'm going to do with that, what am I going to do with my health or my vitality or my clarity or my stress, reduction of stress? And so it ripples, right? And then someone in your life starts noticing that you carry yourself differently. Your presence is suddenly less scattered and it's more gathered. Or that when they're talking, you're less reactive and more spacious. And
More
that's what I
allowing.
think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's how culture changes, not by trying to get back to where we were, but in fact to say like, well, what is this asking of us? What is being asked of me right now that wasn't asked of me before? And how does that become like my superpower? And that, I think, it takes community, all of this, to keep redistributing the effort and keep redistributing the grace, pass the grace along too. And, in a culture that's really accustomed to the me, myself, and I, and the sort of hoarding mentality, stockpiling of resources, stockpiling of this and that, we forget that has an energetic too. And the energetic becomes very detached from one another, disengaged. And it's such a felt difference, a tangible difference when you are immersed in community. That was my other response to your question about the retreats earlier, is I'm intense. I'm super intense. And so I like to immerse. And so that's the thing that draws me. So, we do a lot of retreats at the mountain campus.
Right.
For 15, 16 years, I've run retreats there too, for the totally different thing, which is just stripped down, no bells and whistles, just raw and real.
And I think it's great. So that actually, that immersive experience, I think, is the initial experience that you get when you go to a school like that. Like that's my first memory of the entire experience was, we're going to take you out of this experience, put you in the middle of the mountains. And I think, my first experience was like a mountain bike ride down Pikes Peak. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know these people. Will they rescue me if I die? I mean, like, what's going to happen here? But it's that almost, it's a forced experience together where you're forced to create a little mini community and then grow from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that has probably framed so much. I mean, having grown up there too, right? At the school.
Right.
It's sort of like in the 70s and 80s, sort of a utopia. And then the other place where I lived was out in the middle of nowhere, out in the woods. So I think all that has framed too what I'm drawn to and why I do the things that I do. But talk about community, like, you live together, you eat together, you're like everything. And so it is, and to commune with. So we need it.
We need the stories and the experiences. I think we need that shared bond a lot.
Yeah, like a way of gathering around the campfire on a regular basis, where it's not to entertain, and it's not like there's just no expectation. It's just like, are we genuinely curious enough about one another that we want to hear?
I do. I want to hear the things.
Yeah.
I think that's always been my call. I think is I love the stories. I love hearing the experiences, and I love the sharing, and everything about that kind of guides me into how can I get more of that, and how can I talk to more people, because I'm never satisfied. I always want more, and that's the best way to do it, I think, is to bring people closer and just make them talk.
I love it. It's so sincere. You feel it, you hear it in you. It reminds me a little bit, my best friend in the whole wide world. We grew up at Fountain Valley together. We were babies together. So we've been friends for 47 years. And one thing I always say about her is, like any relationship, I compare it. I'll say, so here's someone who has, oh my gosh, I just realized what he's doing behind.
Oh, I didn't even see him, but that's fantastic.
I'll say, no one knows me like she does. We've known each other our entire lives, and we've never not been close, like our entire lives, as different as we've been too. And we've been through everything. And yet she never stops asking to know who I am. And yet I've had relationships with people in my life where they think they know who I am. They've got me all summed up. And so they have no idea who I am. Or I think one of the great downfalls of any relationship, friendships, intimate relationships, is when you think you've got someone figured out. So you stop being interested, you stop asking, you lose the curiosity. And suddenly, what starts here years later is here because if you don't have the genuine curiosity about someone. But I think that also is deepened by a curiosity about ourselves. Like if I'm not curious about me, if I'm not interested in knowing who I am, who will be?
Right. Right. I think there's something to be said about how that translates to the global space too. And our leadership and everything that we go through, because we accept so often, or it communally, there's an acceptance of what is given, and there's an acceptance of this is what is said, and so therefore this is what I should be. And I don't think that's true. I think we are all beautiful individuals, and the joy is in learning those differences. Like that's exciting.
Yeah.
That's the energy.
Yeah. And the skill of relationship is not to always focus on the deficiencies in one another, but to actually call forth what's beautiful. Like when I think about the work that I did in graduate school, one of the sort of underlying philosophies that people work with, say with animal rights, is, it's kind of like, don't be cruel. But then the underlying assumption is that left to your own devices, cruelty would be your way. I think when you see people as intrinsically good and wanting to do right in the world, even if that's not what's happening, but if you see that as the intrinsic life, everyone was once a baby. Everyone was once a new life in the world, looking around, discovering. And so the skill becomes, can I call forward what's good and kind in you? And right, that's one of the things what we're seeing in the world right now is, instead of calling forth what's good in one another and calling us into to being better to one another, to caring more, to sometimes setting aside the selfishness in order to feel more connected in the world. That there's a lot of just naming, it's just like reiteration of everything that's broken. And it gives it energy. Like from a yogic perspective, where your focus goes, the energy goes. So if your focus is always on everything that has is not redeemable, you just keep putting energy into that and it creates this, right? But what it's like, you can find someone with whom you vehemently disagree about things, and you find the one thing you agree about and you nurture it. Like, I remember somebody talking about this. They're like, well, I couldn't talk about, it's like racial justice work. She's like, but I knew that we both love dogs. I was like, there it is, or my stepfather, who I love my stepfather so much. Like, I love him, love him, love him. And when I was doing the animal rights work, it was tough because he's a cattle rancher. What we talk about vegetable, we talk about gardening, and not as a way of like ignoring something, but like find the place where you nurture connection, because connection in the long run will go a lot further.
Right. I'm glad he's up in the world.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely correct. I think if you take that little seed of love and find it and grow it, it's very hippie-tastic, but I think it's the truth. I think that you do find a much better way to navigate through everything.
Yeah. Well, and if nothing else, like, honestly, at the end of the day, I don't feel great when all I'm carrying around in my mind and in my heart are the thoughts of criticism for the world. It's like, if I'm critical, that's also revealing something I care about. So I was trying to go that next layer. Like when I get really, really pissed, I'm like, okay, I'm going to let myself talk about that with whoever. And then I'm going to figure out, like, what is that showing me? And 9 times out of 10, that is showing me deep care about something, deep pain around something, deep fear around something. So you go to the next layer. And suddenly you're touching something very human, and you begin to see it in other people. You see their vitriol is fear, or you see their, arrogant, adamant sort of stance about something is fear, or it's hurt. And that's the place where we can connect. It's like sometimes the stuff we're talking about isn't what we really should be talking about.
Mm-hmm.
you know Even as there's a really important work to be done in the world, but it's kind of like if I'm speaking Portuguese and you're speaking um French, we may have some crossover, but we're speaking different things.
Right. Right. And that culture shift, that change is, from house to house. It's not country to country.
Exactly. Exactly. Which is one of the reasons I think it's unfortunate in so many ways that in the United States, the predominant way we organize is like the nuclear family.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you see multi-generation living or more communal, like the villages and so forth, where it's sort of like, in a way I grew up this way, because when we went running amok on that campus, like everybody was another parent basically, and then all the everyone was like an older sibling in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But just the sense that it's not just what happens within one's own home, that there's you're integrated into something bigger.
I like the bigger.
Yeah.
It's a good place to be. Well, I could talk to you all day long, but
I
I want
know.
to be cognizant of your time too. So, but we will do this again. I want to do this
I would
again.
love it. Yeah, I would love it. I feel like we just got warmed up.
I know. And that's why I want this podcast to work, because I truly do enjoy the conversations. I think that, they could go on for days and I would be just as content. I'd just pour you another glass of wine and we'd sit down and do this forever. But thank
Maybe
you
next
so
time
much.
we'll do it in person next time too.
That would be fantastic too. I secretly love and fawn over your hearth all the time. It's beautiful. So I would love to come into your
Thanks.
space.
Yeah, I would love for you to do that. Yeah. Let me know for sure. And I'm so excited for you and what you're doing. It's so great to see you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Hopefully it takes off and we build a big tribe and all things are good and we do this forever, because that would make me happy forever. You've been amazing. And before I get too far, let's do the programming notes. So where's your website? How do people find you?
Okay. Website is rootdownandgrow.com. So it's all spelled out, rootdownandgrow.com. And
Perfect.
that's probably the easiest way to find me. I'm
That's
on all the
perfect.
social media, but I flit in and out, as you know.
Yeah. In and out and, off to Iceland, which that sounds so beautiful. But
yeah, well,
awesome.
You'll get the invite for the next one.
Fantastic.
You'll be cordially invited to Northern Iceland.
I'm looking for all of the invites. Awesome. Thank you.